God had a secret plan, one that no one on earth could have guessed. While people were busy with their daily lives, God was quietly preparing something extraordinary, something that would change the course of history forever. King Saul, the leader of Israel, had turned away from God's guidance. He stopped listening, making choices that led the people astray. So God spoke to Samuel, his trusted prophet, a man who always tried to listen for God's voice, even when it was hard to hear. "Go to Bethlehem," God instructed Samuel. "Find a man named Jesse. Among his sons I have chosen the next king." Bethlehem was a small, quiet town, not the kind of place where you'd expect to find a future king. But God often works in unexpected ways. Samuel felt nervous about this mission. He knew Saul might be angry if he found out. But Samuel trusted God's wisdom more than his own fears. With a prayer in his heart, he set out on the journey, determined to obey. When Samuel arrived at Jesse's house, he was greeted by Jesse and his sons. The family gathered, curious and a little anxious, wondering why the prophet had come to visit them. Jesse's oldest son, Eliab, stood tall and strong. He looked every bit like a king, confident, impressive, and commanding. Samuel thought, surely this must be the one God has chosen. But God whispered to Samuel's heart, "Don't judge by his appearance or height. People look at the outside, but I look at the heart." One by one, Jesse's sons stepped forward. Each time Samuel looked at them, and each time God quietly said, "Not this one." 7 sons in total stood before Samuel, and none of them were chosen. The room grew quiet with confusion and anticipation. Samuel turned to Jesse and asked, "Are these all the sons you have?" He sensed there was more to the story, something hidden just out of sight. Jesse replied, "There's still the youngest. He's out in the fields taking care of the sheep." David was so ordinary, so overlooked, that no one thought to invite him to the gathering. Samuel said firmly, "Send for him. We won't sit down to eat until he arrives." The family quickly sent someone to fetch David from the fields. Soon, David appeared, sun-kissed from days outdoors, his eyes bright with curiosity and kindness. He didn't look like a king, but there was something special about him, something only God could see. God spoke to Samuel's heart, "This is the one, anoint him." So, right there in front of his family, Samuel poured oil on David's head, marking him as God's chosen king. The oil was a symbol of God's spirit and blessing. Everyone was amazed. God's choice surprised them all. He didn't pick the strongest or the oldest, but the one with a heart that truly loved him. God saw what no one else could see, a humble shepherd boy who would one day lead a nation. After David was anointed, God's spirit filled him. But King Saul was troubled by a dark sadness. Saul's servants suggested music might help. One said, "I know a boy who plays the harp." David, Jesse's son. Saul sent for David. David came to the palace with his harp. Whenever Saul felt troubled, David played gentle melodies. The music soothed Saul's heart and chased away the darkness. Saul liked David and made him his armor-bearer. David's music brought peace to the king because God was with him. In the days of ancient Israel, a shadow fell across the land. Israel faced a terrifying enemy, the Philistines, a fierce and relentless people who threatened their very existence. The two armies camped on opposite hills, separated by a valley, the tension thick in the air as the sun rose each morning. Their champion, Goliath, was a giant of a man, towering above all others, clad head to toe in heavy bronze armor that gleamed in the sunlight. His spear was like a weaver's beam, and his shield was carried by another man. He seemed invincible, a living symbol of terror. Every day Goliath strode out before the armies, his voice booming across the valley. He shouted, "Send someone to fight me!" His challenge echoed, mocking the Israelites and daring anyone to face him in single combat. The Israelites were paralyzed with fear. Soldiers hid behind rocks and shields, their courage melting away at the sound of Goliath's roar. No one dared to step forward, and hope seemed to fade with each passing day. For 40 long days Goliath issued his challenge, and for 40 days not a single Israelite answered. The standoff dragged on, the silence between the armies growing heavier, as if time itself was holding its breath. Meanwhile, far from the battlefield, Jesse sent his youngest son David to bring food to his older brothers who served in the army. David was just a shepherd boy, untested in war but full of curiosity and spirit. David arrived at the camp just as Goliath roared his daily challenge. The ground seemed to tremble with the giant's voice, and David watched in amazement as the soldiers shrank back in fear. David, puzzled by the fear he saw, asked the men around him, "Who is this Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God?" His words were bold, filled with a faith that set him apart from the trembling soldiers, while others trembled and doubted. David's heart burned with faith and courage. He could not understand why no one trusted that God would deliver them from this threat. David knew deep within that God was bigger than any giant, and that faith, not size or strength, would decide the outcome of this battle. When David arrived at the battlefield, his older brothers were quick to scold him, telling him he didn't belong there and accusing him of being nosy. But David wasn't discouraged. Instead, he kept asking the soldiers about the giant Goliath, wanting to know why no one was willing to stand up to him. David's curiosity and courage stood out, even though he was just a young shepherd boy among seasoned warriors. He couldn't understand why everyone was so afraid when God was on their side. Word of David's questions and boldness quickly spread through the camp, and soon it reached King Saul himself. Intrigued by this brave young boy, Saul sent for David and had him brought before him in his royal tent. Saul looked at David with concern and disbelief. He said, "You can't fight Goliath. You're just a boy, and Goliath has been a warrior since his youth. How could you possibly stand against him?" But David spoke up with confidence. He explained to Saul that as a shepherd, he had faced danger before. Whenever a lion or a bear came to attack his sheep, David would chase after it, strike it, and rescue the lamb. He said, "The Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and the bear will deliver me from this Philistine too." Impressed by David's faith, Saul agreed to let him try. He offered David his own royal armor to wear, hoping it would protect him. But the armor was far too big and heavy for David. He could barely move in it, and it didn't feel right. So David took off the armor and chose instead to rely on what he knew. He went down to a nearby stream and carefully picked out 5 smooth stones, placing them in his shepherd's pouch. With his trusty sling in hand, he was ready. With only his staff, his sling, and his unshakable faith in God, David walked out alone into the valley to face the giant Goliath. The entire army watched as this young shepherd, so small compared to the giant, stepped forward with courage. David didn't look like a warrior at all. He wore no armor, carried no sword, and yet he stood tall, trusting completely in God's power to help him do the impossible. Goliath laughed at David, but David shouted, "I come in the name of the Lord." David ran toward Goliath, slung a stone, and struck the giant down. The Philistines fled. Israel cheered and chased them. David became a hero. The people sang, "Saul has slain his thousands, and David his tens of thousands." Saul grew jealous and afraid, seeing that God was with David. The boy who trusted God changed everything.